sometimes your life is in their hands.
Meet the Boeing team that tests planes before you fly in them. Our own Chris Egert spent some time with the men and women in charge of test driving Boeing's newest aircraft and even took a shot at flying a Dreamliner himself.
Flight. It's truly hard to believe that we've come so far in such a relatively short period of time. From the Wright brothers' first flight to the state-of-the-art Boeing Dreamliner set to be delivered to its first customer this year. And just like the Wrights pushed their aircraft to its limits, so did these three: Heather Ross, Mike Bryan, and Norman Howell. Three people who all wanted to one day fly airplanes and now have the chance as test pilots for Boeing.
I sort of imagined it because I always wanted to do that. I grew up in the 1960s.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The early 60s especially were a period of extreme technological optimism, and that's the kind of environment that I grew up in, and I'd always wanted to do this sort of work. The fact that I was able to do it and actually be reasonably successful is extremely gratifying.
Norman Howell, a senior experimental test pilot, has been with Boeing for 12 years. Like many of the 80 or so test pilots that the company employs worldwide, he landed at Boeing after serving in the military. Howell says what you don't know about test pilots is that they spend as much time on the ground as they do in the air. Meeting after meeting after meeting.
The image that the public has of a test pilot is this dashing hero that smokes a cigarette and hops into the unknown airplane and goes and pushes the edge of the envelope where no one has gone before. The actual reality of that is that flight test that we do here is a very, very careful and disciplined engineering development.
Howell, who jokes that his favorite plane is the next one he gets to fly, clearly knows his way around a T-33 Shooting Star.
It is very, very small. It's smaller, much smaller than a compact car even. So once you get in here, you're literally wearing the airplane.
But what most of his time and energy is focused on right now is working on Boeing's tanker refueling program. Boeing is in a major competition with European rival Airbus to win a multi-billion-dollar bid from the U.S. government.
I will tell you that we look forward to winning that competition.
Boeing has been competing with itself to get the 787 Dreamliner off the ground, unveiled with much fanfare 3 years ago, yet riddled with production delays. The first airplane is yet to be delivered.
We all shoulder some of that burden, some of that responsibility. But the way it's structured, it's not one person that makes it or breaks it. It's all of us working together as a group that attains the goals that we've set out.
Heather Ross, test pilot for Dreamliner Jet number 4, is the ultimate team player. She's fought in the first Gulf War and is helping Boeing's 787 program battle its critics. She and other Dreamliner team members truly believe that this aircraft will be a game changer. The plane is built with composite materials to burn less fuel, which cuts operational costs and allows the carriers to focus on making passengers more comfortable than the planes that we fly on today.
With the 787, we've created a new, I think it is a new benchmark for civil aviation, for commercial aviation. My nephew just started pilot training in the Air Force. He's the one, he and his generation and the generation after him are going to be the ones that are going to remember this airplane. They're going to fly this airplane.
Test pilot Mike Bryan was inspired to fly at age 8 when, as a Cub Scout in Washington, D.C., he was selected to go to the Pentagon and make a presentation to the Vice Chief of Naval Operations.
I knew I always wanted to fly. Wanted to study aerospace engineering, be a pilot. Flying off of carriers would be neat, and I just said, I'll just go to Georgia Tech, get an aero degree, and go be a carrier pilot. And I guess it takes that blind trust or confidence to say, why not, and do it, but it's worked out for me, and I've loved it.
It has indeed worked out for Mike Bryan. He started out test piloting the FA-18 Hornet, then moved on to the 737 and 777 programs. And the former Navy pilot is also quick to point out that test piloting in 2010 isn't quite what it used to be.
In the 40s and the 50s, I think there was a point where take the plane up, go see what it does, and we'll find out. And at times it doesn't work out and the plane loses control and you lose a plane. That is so not what we do.
What they do is spend day after day after day in flight simulators like this one for the Dreamliner.
The simulator in many ways is very, very close to the actual airplane. You don't have the motion effects and some of the buffeting that you get really flying, but actually the way the plane rolls and pitches and responds is extremely accurate.
And on this particular aircraft, they were starting from scratch. Brian not only helped engineers develop the computers and equipment that help fly the plane, but something you might not have thought of, like where in this crowded space will the flight crew be able to eat lunch?
How we would eat, we'd take pictures of how you would sit, it's just how you would put your sunglasses up. There's a lot of aspects for a new airplane that maybe not everybody knows about, and that's just one of them.
Brian estimates that he spent thousands of hours in this simulator fine-tuning the elaborate control panel.
There's your engine gauges. Push them up until they're pointing kind of straight down, you'll see.
To show just how user-friendly the cockpit is, he even let me take the controls for a few spins.
Okay, so there's Renton where we build the 737s.
This simulator's stunning graphics aren't designed to mimic a video game, but to give pilots greater ability to keep their eyes up and not glancing down at the displays.
Is that Green Lake?
Sure is. Go check it out. So we're just doing a little steeper turn than airline pilot would, just to give you a good sight here.
The day that I was pretending to fly, Boeing had real pilots in the air on 35 different flights, performing tests in the skies over Kuwait, Iraq, Malaysia, California, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Washington.
Caution, obstacle.
Caution, he pointed out the Columbia Tower.
Pointed out the tower.
The goal is that when the commercial pilots eventually fly these planes, they'll love them. Airlines will order more and more from Boeing, and the area's biggest employer will continue to thrive in the Puget Sound region. There's a lot riding on the actions of 80 or so test pilots safely landing the plane in turbulent economic times.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Great flight.
We didn't crash.
Did a great job.
To date, Boeing has received around 850 orders for the Dreamliner, valued at more than $100 billion. The first fleet is scheduled for delivery to Japan's All Nippon Airways around the end of the year.
Well, straight ahead on Cairo 7 Profiles.
There are certain techniques that really make a difference over time for couples.
The doctors that can tell you if your marriage is going to last. The 4 things you need to avoid, next on Cairo 7 Profiles.
For the past 15 years, Doctors John and Julie Gottman's breakthrough work on relationship stability has helped thousands of couples turn their marriage woes into renewed vows.
So want to know if your marriage will last or relationship will work? Well, just ask the Gottmans. Sustaining a happy, healthy relationship just may be the most difficult thing you'll ever do. And the numbers prove it. 1 out of every 2 marriages in the U.S. will end in divorce. Ever wonder which direction you're heading with your partner? You may find the answer northwest of Seattle. A ferry ride away from Anacortes on Orcas Island, at the home of Doctors John and Julie Gottman. For nearly 40 years, Dr. John Gottman has been studying what makes marriages succeed or fail.
Every time somebody has a problem, your answer to it is what they need is a best friend.
The initial motivation for his research may surprise you.
I was really motivated by my own failures of relationships with women and trying to understand how to make it work.
There was another reason. No one really knew back then why some marriages flourished while others fell apart. The research was sketchy.
I didn't think that the knowledge that we had about relationships at that time was useful enough to be able to intervene and make a difference.
So in 1972, Dr. Gottman teamed up with a colleague to begin the long process of measuring the differences between good and bad marriages.
So we just spent a long time just observing and following couples over time and trying to plagiarize that information from couples, which is what I think research is about. The way we went about studying this was really very much descriptive. We had couples come in at the end of the day after having been apart for 8 hours and talk about how their day went, and then identify an area of continuing conflict and disagreement and try to sort of talk about it and see if they could come to a resolution of it.
That research eventually led to Dr. Gottman's famous Love Laboratory, where Gottman and his team at the University of Washington collected physical and psychological data from thousands of couples as they argued. Partners would be connected to monitors that would gauge heart rate, breathing, and blood pressure. Video cameras would record body language and negative facial expressions that could spell marital discord.
It took us decades to analyze these data and try to figure out what patterns were there and build a theory of how couples really related to each other in marriages that were working. And then about 15 years ago, Julie and I got together and we started trying to build a theory that was useful clinically and integrate that basic research with our clinical experience together working on relationships.
John's research and the 3,000 plus couples that were the subjects of the research really taught us everything that we need to know about what makes marriage work.
What's somewhat frightening about the Gottman's research is their ability to determine which marriages are destined to succeed or fail. The Gottmans say they can predict with more than 90% accuracy the fate of a relationship within the first 3 minutes of observation.
When we look at how a conflict discussion starts in the laboratory, we find that about 94% of the time, 90 to 96% of the time, the way it begins is the way it's going to continue for the whole 15 minutes. So that beginning startup is really very critical.
I'm better off here. And we've discussed that.
The most important thing that couples really need to hear is that that prediction rate only stands for couples who don't get help, you see. So if they're getting help, if they're getting intervention, then all of that can be changed.
But when you go back there, you don't spend the time with Linda anyway.
After analyzing some 5,000 hours of Love Lab video recordings, the Gottmans have developed a formula for reading what's really happening during moments of conflict between couples.
So part of what we're seeing is that, first of all, she's speaking in terms of we, which is a good sign, as opposed to I.
The very best times that you and I have had and when we felt the best is when we've given of ourselves to somebody else. When we have...
No, that's not when we felt the best.
There's positivity, there's a sense of we-ness that all reveals a fairly strong, good connection between them.
But with another couple...
You can't talk to your mother.
But you have never tried.
Yes, I
You have never sat down with her at a table after these problems have come up and gone and talked to her.
So what we saw there was his attack, and he's leaning forward, he's really engaging the attack, and you this and that, accusing her, and she defending. So right away they're into a negative cycle. You can see that in just a few seconds. If they were coming to us really to change their relationship, we could make a really big difference with them just in a couple of days. We could turn around these patterns.
For the past 15 years, the Gottmans have been doing their best to help couples turn around their negative patterns. With the creation of the Gottman Relationship Institute, they offer dozens of books, DVDs, private retreats, and marathon therapy sessions for couples.
So what happens when a problem is gridlocked?
They've also shared their wisdom with more than 10,000 couples at workshops like this one recently held at the Seattle Center.
People have got to stop talking about solving this issue and make the relationship safe enough so that they can really listen to one another's dreams.
And it is a workshop. Couples spend a full 2 days learning and exercising the Gottman strategies, such as making 5 positive statements about your partner for every negative one you say during an argument. Research shows those couples usually stay together.
People in their mind start vilifying their partner. They start thinking, you know, the reason this is happening is because my partner is, most common insult in your mind is selfish.
Another key to happiness, avoiding the 4 traits that spell doom for every relationship. what the Gottmans call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
First of all, criticism. When we bring up a problem, doing it with criticism by pointing out a flaw in our partner's character or personality doesn't work. It just makes the partner want to be defensive, which is number 2. The second horseman. Defensiveness doesn't work, and defensiveness is usually counterattacking, counter-blaming. Third is what we call contempt, and contempt is the most corrosive. Contempt is talking to the partner from a place on high, as a superior, talking down to them with contempt, with insult.
And the 4th horseman is stonewalling, where you really withdraw emotionally from the relationship.
I think now our dreams are more family-oriented.
It's a lot to absorb in a 2-day workshop, but SHANNA and Tony FISHEL say they are living proof of the payoff. They completed the workshop 4 years ago, and they are still happily married. How do you fight differently now than you did before you attended the workshop?
When we have a fight, we have something to fall back on. We're not just floating in the air, aimlessly not knowing what to do. So it's giving us really the tools, the skills, the vocabulary to argue well.
Yeah, it's the analysis after the fact that I found helpful. Because I don't think I ever did that prior to the Institute. I mean, there are still things that we don't agree with on everything, but we agree on so much that we don't have to worry about the small parts that we disagree.
And you can open each of these fists.
Believe it or not, when John Gottman began his research, he never imagined he'd actually help couples in this way.
He was making these incredible discoveries about what predicted whether couples would stay together or separate and divorce. And I, as a clinician, thought, you know, we really ought to do something with this. Let's bring it out of the ivory tower. So we were sitting in a canoe one day out in the middle of the ocean, and we just started to talk about, gosh, what if we turned this into a workshop? What if we really use the therapy model that we've created from John's research and take it to the people, so to speak?
When you are the people who go out and speak about marriage and how to improve marriage, how much pressure do you feel to be the perfect couple?
Zero.
Zero. How can that be?
You know, just because we're teaching about marriage doesn't mean we are the ones who created all the answers and we are the gurus, the great wise ones. In fact, we work very hard to take us off that pedestal.
John and Julie Gottman may not consider themselves love gurus, but many people look to them for answers. With that in mind, both of you tell me, what's the secret to making a marriage work?
I'd say small positive things often. Small positive things often. So what that means is say thank you often. Say, I really respect what you're doing often. Say, I love you often.
It's very important for guys to honor their wives' dreams, their life dreams, to know what their woman really dreams about in life, and to honor and respect that and make those things come true.
Relationships take work, but the reward is overwhelming joy.
And he smiles. The Gottman Institute has published dozens of books and DVDs on the secrets to maintaining a healthy marriage. For more information about them and upcoming Gottman workshops, go to our website, KairoTV.com.
Thank you for joining us for Cairo 7 Profiles. I'm Steve Rabel.
And I'm Angela Russell. Cairo 7 Eyewitness News is just seconds away.